speaking. That will help with some of the background. We are ready to share.
Thank you, Dr. Petrie Martin. We're now back in open session, and we'll begin with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee led by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I share the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Good morning, everyone. And as we have been doing as late, we start with an item of new business, a quick update on several different standards revisions processes. Dr. Day.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing us to bring updates this morning. We have 2 slides that we bring forward every month. The first one is a reminder of State Board Policy SCOS 012, which facilitates our review and revision, sets the stage for us with those phases. And then the next slide links to our internal procedures manual, which gives details, examples, templates on the process that we take as we review and revise and then implement standards. So we'll bring updates with a couple different standard courses of study. The first one is Healthful Living. At the June meeting, we brought forward draft 1 of the standards. So those have been released to the public. They were released June 5th. So there are 2 surveys, PSU specific, and then an all stakeholder survey. And those will close September 18th. And then from there, data will be analyzed and organized by the DRC, the Data Review Committee, and they will complete a report. We anticipate between drafts 1 and 2, there will be changes between those 2 drafts. And then we also anticipate changes between drafts 2 and 3. So just want to reiterate that we are in process and we are just at the beginning, basically, of this process with draft 1. The next one is we have arts. Arts and world languages are very similar in where they are. At the last board meeting, we were granted permission to move forward with revision. So the standards writing team applications were released June 5th and they closed last week. So they are working through those applications with an internal DPI team. Members of the Office of Academic Standards as well as other offices are taking a look at those applications. They're blinded. And then once that is complete, members will be notified and their work session and orientation will be held the week of July 17th. From there, the SWT, the Standards Writing Team, will work to complete draft 1. The next is world languages. It's very similar to the arts. SWT applications were released June 5th after permission to revise was granted. Those applications closed, and the same process is being used to review those applications with other members across the agency, and their orientation work session will be held the week of July 24th, and then they will work to complete their draft 1 of the K-12 world languages standards. The K-12 guidance standards are a little different. As we mentioned in the June meeting, the data pointed towards possibly adopting the American School Counselor Association student mindsets and behaviors. We wanted to make sure we had a strong understanding from the field and stakeholders on if that is the direction that they would like to go. So we released a survey very specific about those mindsets and behaviors. Those will close in a few weeks, and then data will be organized and analyzed, and the DRC will come back together to review that data and to create another report to tell which direction we're going to go, whether the stakeholders would like to adopt the ASCA mindsets and behaviors, or if we will continue with the process that we normally do with standards of revising those standards. And those are our updates.
All right, any questions for Dr. Day? Hearing none, thank you, Dr. Day, and we will move on to our action items. The first one is SLA 1, which are recommendations to eliminate the Compliance Commission on Account of Accountability, which is SBE Policy ADVS-000. We discussed this last month. There were a couple of suggestions made, and some changes have occurred over the last month. So, Dr. Howard, if you will bring us up to date on what you've been doing this month around this particular item.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz, and good morning. So yes, based on feedback from the State Board in June, we established a process in the rare occurrence that we possibly could have the need for a standalone field test in the future. Of course, this had become the primary purpose of the Compliance Commission, and the rationale for rescinding the policy to have the Compliance Commission is we do not anticipate having any standalone field test in the future. But in preparation of if that were to occur, the plan is to have an internal review committee consisting of directors or their designees for academic standards, exceptional children's, federal programs, advanced learning, as well as the principal advisor and the teacher advisor to form an internal committee, would review any appeals for participation submitted by public school units, and their recommendation would then be shared with the State Board for consideration of approval or denial. And we'll publish this in our test coordinator's handbook, which is an annual document that is distributed to all public school units, and that way it will be affirmed and documented in case we are ever in the situation where we do need to have appeals from a standalone field test participation. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Any questions about this item for Dr. Howard? Hearing none, let's move on to SLA 2, which is a State Board of Education Policy Amendment 2024-25 Career and Technical Education Course Inventory, SCOS-005. Mr. Michael, any changes on this item from what we heard last month?
No, ma'am. We've had no comments, questions, and made no changes.
This is an action that takes place each year to update these courses because they do change frequently in their. We have to stay up to date on those more than in other areas. So.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Michael? All right. SLA 3 is another State Board of Education policy amendment, course for credit, which is CCRE-001. Ms. Shaw Coltrane, just to remind everyone, this is work that's being done around our honors courses that adds guidance and framework to ensure fidelity, consistency, and implementation of honors level courses across the state. Anything new to report on this, Ms. Shaw Coltrane?
No, Ms. Kamnitz, we've had no negative feedback, no questions. We did receive some emails thanking us for this work. So I do think some LEAs are really excited to move forward with this.
I think this is going to make a big difference for our students across the state.
Yes, ma'am.
So, thank you for this work. Our last action item is SLA 4, which is the approval of the proposed K-12 science standards and the extended content standards for science. There was some discussion again around this item last month, and so I'm going to ask Dr. Day and I think Mr. Aiken to let us let us know to review these updates.
Yes, thank you. We have two updates from last month based on State Board conversation. The first one was around the physical science standards and the verbs, not with the objectives, but with the standards. And there was conversation around those verbs being the same across all of the physical science standards. So the physical science standard writing team went back and took a look, and they changed some of those standards, some of the verbs within the standards, just that first verb within the standards. And so made some few changes there. You have those updates. We did a Friday update, and then you have them in the board materials. And then the second update was to the introduction for each grade and course. That was updated to include information regarding the scientific method. So on the next slide, you'll see the text of that introduction. I'm going to slide it over to Dr. Aiken to take us through an explanation of that.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Day. One of the things we wanted to do after the last board meeting was just make sure that we did emphasize for all of our stakeholders the role of the scientific method in our content standards. So this is an introduction that is actually included with every set of standards, each of the K-8 and all the high school courses. So one of the things we sort of put in there was, that the scientific method is not intended to go away. It is a key part of every science teacher's classroom instruction. And then to sort of explain what the role of the practices are in supporting both the scientific method in each of its pieces, as well as supporting the durable skills within the portrait of a graduate. So this is something that we forwarded to, I believe, the board members, just so you could kind of have to see it. And this would be a revision, and it would be included with each set of content standards for science.
Thank you, Mr. Aiken. Any questions for Dr. Day or Mr. Aiken about these adjustments? All right, hearing none, we will.
I'm sorry. I was muted. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dr.
Ms. Kamnitz, I have a quick question. Thank you, Dr. Aiken. I'm happy to see the addressing of the scientific method. Here it is in writing, so this is very helpful. My related question has to do with emphasis on critical thinking skills, and not just as it relates to science, but we talk about critical thinking in multiple ways in education. I guess my question has more to do with the extent to which we are, as an agency, coming up with, or maybe there is such a thing as some guidance around what is the meaning of critical thinking, whether it's in a strictly worded definition or some guidance to teach, because it comes up, I'm sure, daily in schools, critical thinking. And there may be 1,000 different or more definitions or concepts rolling in the minds of teachers when we talk about critical thinking. I just think that maybe the agency needs to think of maybe either a definition or some guidance around what does it mean. I think we all know that it means looking at things with objectivity and going through the scientific method and then keeping an open mind. So that would be my wish, is that
Olivia, sorry, Dr. I hear you saying that this goes beyond just the science standards in terms of what the definition. So why don't we explore this possibly in the future in our committee and sort of work on this?
Absolutely, that would be my wish. It's not just specific to the teaching of science. We talk about it across the content.
All right. We'll take this up at a future meeting.
Yeah,
how about that?
to raise it.
Comments?
Yes.
May I make a comment, please? I would just remind the board that critical thinking is very clearly defined in the Portrait of a Graduate, and that this has been integrated into even the introduction that Dr. Aiken has on the screen right now. And so while we cannot require as an agency that teachers integrate the Portrait of a Graduate into their work or require really much of anything outside of the use of the standards, we certainly think that the board's adoption of the Portrait of a Graduate, as well as all of the work that the agency has done to share rubrics, develop lesson plans, communicate with parents and school leaders about critical thinking and the other 6 competencies is a very good start to this conversation.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. That's a very good point. I would just add to that. So should we assume that the definition of critical thinking that's part of the Portrait of a Graduate, that is the standing definition that we will adhere to and promote across the state? Because in effect, we have approved the Portrait of a Graduate. Does that mean that that definition is how we will proceed, which is fine?
Well, I mean, we can set a definition, but we cannot require districts to use our definition of critical thinking or any other competency. I think that in communicating the 7 competencies the way that we have, and the board's formal adoption of or reception or approval, whatever word you want to use, of the Portrait of a Graduate, I don't know that we don't have a way to enforce or hold districts accountable for using a particular definition of critical thinking.
What we can continue to do is advocate for that and the other six competencies.
That's right.
Whether you call it a definition or not, we can advocate for that. No, and I realize full well that we can't dictate what districts decide to do. So those are my current concerns around scientific method, but also to roll in some discussion about the critical thinking.
Yeah, there are considerable amount of resources that we've provided teachers in the hopes that there will be some consistency across the state in how those 7 competencies including critical thinking will be approached. There's pages and pages of examples, lesson plans, rubrics to define, etc.
Thank you. Thank you.
Objectivity is the key. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Day, Mr. Aiken. We'll move on to two items for action on first read. The first is SLA 5, another State Board of Education Policy Amendment, KNEC-003. This is the read to achieve alternative assessment and twice retained definitions. Dr. Ryan, we'll hand this over to you. Oh, Ms. Parrish.
I'll just say good morning. I'll get us started. The Office of Early Learning is coming before the State Board to present an update on policy KNEC 003, the twice retained definition. If you'll recall, last year we focused on adding second grade because our goal is prevention over intervention. And so the earlier we intervene, the better off we are. So at this time, I will turn it to Tanya Parrish, who's going to share the specific information.
Good morning. As Amy mentioned today, we are just asking that we include first grade. If you recall last year when we brought to the State Board, we wanted to ensure that we were supporting our districts by providing a clear definition of what twice retained was. And the goal is to include all K-3 students for identification of twice retained as those funds became available. So based on our current funds beginning for the 23-24 school year, twice retained, we are asking that it includes all students that have been retained in first grade, second grade, and then again in third grade. Our goal is to continue to monitor and extend those funds to meet the goal of eventually including our kindergarten students as well. But at this time, we are asking to add first grade into that definition. So again, that would mean that any student that had been retained in first grade or second grade or third grade, and then again in third grade, by either placement in the third grade class or given that read and retain label, they would then be identified as twice retained and receive supplemental tutoring as outlined in legislation.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. Any questions about this addition of first grade to the definition? All right, thank you so much. We are sticking with our early learning group, and SLA 6 is Read to Achieve Implementation Guide Update, KNEC-003. Yeah, the same, sorry, the same policy. Dr. Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Chemnitz. And good morning. Once again, the Office of Early Learning is here to share updates and additions to the Excellent Public Schools Act of 2021 Comprehensive Plan for Reading Achievement, also known as the Read to Achieve Implementation Guide, for your approval today. And Kelly Bentheim will share the updates.
Good morning. Thank you, Amy. As a refresher, based on the updated Excellent Public Schools Act of 2021 legislation, the Read to Achieve Implementation Guide was initially approved in October of 2021. The goal is to have this guide updated and prepared annually by each July board meeting to make sure that districts have access to this information so they can use it to plan and prepare for their upcoming school year. So the Comprehensive Plan for Reading Achievement Guide fulfills the Read to Achieve legislative requirements from 115C 83.4. As stated in those requirements, the State Board of Education has to develop, implement, and continuously evaluate a comprehensive plan to improve reading achievement in public schools. That plan is based on reading instructional practices with strong evidence of effectiveness in current research and reading development. This plan is referred to as the Comprehensive Plan for Reading Achievement and is embedded throughout this guide along with all components of SB 387. In an effort to align the name of this support guide with the legislation, the name has been updated this year to Comprehensive Plan for Reading Achievement as the main header to highlight this important alignment. In your highlighted red line working copy of the guide, you will find several updates noted here on the slide. I'd like to highlight a couple of those for you this morning. The superintendent has updated her opening message to reflect the fact that work has been in progress now for 2 years, and initial assessment data is showing great gains in grades K through 3. Support documents for letters have been updated, outdated documents removed, and our reading camp implementation guide was changed to reflect the improved assessment process for summer reading camps. A new addition based on stakeholder feedback as well as district need is a letter sustainability guide. As districts continue to complete letters, the support the Office of Early Learning has offered has evolved with the new learning of our district leaders and teachers. This guide addresses continuous learning, best practices, sustainability models, funding, and continuation of logistics as districts onboard BTs, new teachers, and new to North Carolina educators. Not shown on this slide, but hot off the presses, we have a new North Carolina Science of Reading alignment tool. As district leaders, school leaders, and educators continue learning about the science of reading, one of their big next steps includes providing support as they ensure curriculum and resources selected for instruction are high-quality instructional materials that align to the science of reading. The North Carolina Science of Reading Alignment Tool is not a recommended list, but rather an informative guidance document that determines the level of alignment with evidence-based literacy practices and reading science research. This tool and accompanying guidebook, which serve to support districts with implementation and best practices. And then finally, I just want to point out that this guide is the product of a collaboration between several offices within the Department of Public Instruction, district leaders, and internal partners. And this guide is not the work of the Office of Early Learning alone. We work in collaboration, and we're grateful for our partners, internal and external, who have contributed to this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions about these updates to this very important guide that is, I am sure, incredibly used extensively by our districts and our teachers? Any questions about this? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Finally, we have one consent item, SLA 7, which is the State Advisory Council on Indian Education, otherwise known as SACE. They have presented to us 5 nominees for membership on the council, and they are as follows: Amanda Frizzard, who is a parent and a reappointment; Brandy Jacobs, a parent and an educator, and also a returning appointment; and then 3 new appointments: Stephen Bell as an educator, Tamara Carter as a parent, and Will Paul as an educator. So we will be voting to approve those 5 individuals this morning or this afternoon. And that concludes the SLA committee business today.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We'll now move to the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools, led by Mr. John Blackburn. Mr. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I serve as the chair of Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee. My trusted co-chair is Jill Kamnitz, and I look forward to working with her and with the board in this role. Our first action item today is ready to open 2023 final recommendations, and I will call on Ms. Ashley Beccaro to bring us up to speed on that. Reminder to my fellow board members, this is very important because school's going to open next month. So Ashley, if you could bring us up to speed on these, that'd be great.
All right. Good morning. I'm getting a little. Let's see. Okay. So consistent with state board policy and legislation, the State Board of Education has to approve any schools that are getting ready to open. and there is a legislatively required planning period, which we call the Ready to Open process. So this year, our 2023 cohort, we have 7 schools that have successfully made it through RTO 1 and 2. They have attended all of the planning sessions that we put on here at DPI, a new Charter Schools Leadership Institute, and they have all presented to CSAB multiple times. And in the previous month's meeting, all 7 were recommended unanimously to open. So if we take a look at the minimum guidelines, there is no explicit statute or rule that lays out specifically what a school must have to open, but there are certain guidelines that we use with the Charter Schools Advisory Board. And the 4 kind of main guidelines we use is that they are at 75% of projected enrollment by the time they approve, that they have substantial progress towards receiving their educational certificate of occupancy. They also have a contingency plan in place for facility, that they have you can go to the next one, Maria, that they have a regular and a break-even budget. And for their progress report, which is a series of submissions they make to our office, everything from certificate of insurance, liability, to fire inspections, all of those things go through our office, and they have to have areas either emerging or quality. So in other words, there's nothing marked insufficient. So if we take a look at the 7 schools, the first school is Mountain City Public Montessori School. And I'll have some updates to bring you guys that I received after submitting these materials. But they were an accelerated applicant. They just applied and were approved last year. They have not had a delay, and they will be opening really in the center of the city of Asheville, downtown. It's a small Montessori school, starting with 106 kids. They are currently at 100% ADM, and they continue to add to their waitlist daily. They have their facility already. Their ECO is expected. It looks like July 19th, they're having a fire inspection for their fire-rated doors that are being installed, and their first day of school is August 22nd. So they should hopefully have a month in between receipt of that CO and then the first day of school. The second school is Aspire Trade High School. This school has had 2 delays. They're in Mecklenburg County, and they are going to be a CTE programmatic high school, just high school. They'll start with 9th and 10th grade. Their year 1 ADM is 242. And as of yesterday, I spoke with the school. They're currently at 83% enrolled. And they're building a brand new facility, but they are still expecting their CO by July 31st. And their first day of school is August 23rd. The third school is Wayne STEM Academy. This will be a elementary school in Goldsboro. They're in Wayne County. Their approved year 1 ADM is 292. And as of yesterday, they are at 89% enrolled with 22 students on their wait list. They are expecting their modulars, inspections and installations to be completed on July 17th. And their first day of school is August 28th. The next school is a movement school, so we're adding movement schools have certainly been increasing in the state. They are a 2021 applicant and have not had a delay. As you guys know, they start small with just K-1 and build slowly on their elementary program. They have an approved year 1 ADM of 125. And as of yesterday, they had 1 spot remaining in first grade. So they're nearly fully enrolled. They are locating and retrofitting a previous church space. And their inspections and completion with the TCO is scheduled for August 1st. And they have their first day of school is August 21st. The next school is Bonnie Cone Leadership Academy. This is a Mecklenburg school. This is our largest opening school. Their approved year 1 ADM is 1,725. They're currently at 80% of enrollment. And their facility, they're doing a new construction facility. It's on track to open and receive their certificate of occupancy in the next couple weeks. The opening date is August 21st, and this is in the Huntersville area of Mecklenburg. Legacy Classical Academy. This is an accelerated school, so you recently approved them last year. They, in order to become an accelerated school, as you know, they must already have a facility locked down, so they had a church locked already to go. We have already received their certificate of occupancy. They're currently at 86% approved ADM, and they're opening they actually are going to be opening, I think it was K-3 with 201 students. And the last school we have is the School of the Arts for Boys. This is a school that had a delay. It's opening in Chatham County, and in year one, they have a little kind of unique way of doing their grades. They're actually starting with third to sixth grade, and they are at 80% of approved ADM. Their facility, we've already received their certificate of occupancy, so we have that in hand, and they're scheduled for opening August 14th. So those are the 7 schools that for which your board will need to vote on today as to whether they are ready to open. Upon that approval, if you choose to approve, our office then sends their formal charter agreement out, and that is kind of the contract, the license that is between the state and the board of directors that run the charter school, and makes it official. We also have, just as an FYI, we've had a lot of delays over the last couple of years. So we have 7 schools, and all of them are actually, Greenville Prep has already received a delay, so they're all delayed. We've received all the paperwork we need for those. So these are 7 schools that were originally supposed to start either last year or this year. Now will roll into our next cohort. And so they will join, I believe, the 6 or 7 schools that were approved this year. So we'll already be at maybe 12 or 13 schools heading into this next planning session. And then any additional schools that you approve with the 2023 cycle will be added to this as well.
Any questions of Ms. Picaro? A follow-up. Actually, next month, if we could just summarize, once again, looking at these schools in August to see how they did. I think that would be helpful to the board.
Like an update on meeting or
yeah.
Okay.
Please. Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell. Ashley, in the Investment Management Division, we have these different colors that of things we should be are red, yellow, and green. And it might be helpful to me that things that are red or getting red or you think are going to stay red, that because I get all this information, which I appreciate, but I just can't ingest it all. And just it's like a money manager who's not going in the right direction. Just need to know, which ones are hot and you think that are going to get hotter.
Absolutely. It's working on a board. I think, and we can concerns.
Ms. Picaro, aren't we fairly confident these are all green right at the moment?
Yes, yes. These ones are, they can't really get through this rigorous ready to open process, which in some cases has been over 2 years for these schools without showing that they're strong and ready to open.
Any other questions on this? If not, we'll move to the next one. We have 2 action on first read. And if I could call on Dr. Petrie Martin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
At this time, I'm getting some echo.
So at this time, I am presenting Alex Quigley as the State Board of Education's recommendation to the Charter School Advisory Board, and this is an item that will be action on first read for this month.
Okay, so everyone here, so Alex's resume was sent out to the board. Ms. Kamnitz and I both talked to Alex, and he has served on this board before, the CSAP board, and is willing to come back and serve us again. Pretty amazing young man, so I feel very fortunate that we can recommend him to you today. Any questions? Hearing none, and we'll go to EICS 3. I think, Dr. Jordan, are you up?
Yes, sir. Good morning. Before you today is a recommendation to appoint Mr. Jimmy Autry to the Board of Trustees for the North Carolina School for the Deaf. As you know, the board took action last month on the other two residential schools. This is in keeping with legislation that will require each school to be under the direction of an independent Board of Trustees. Mr. Autry is a graduate of the North Carolina School for the Deaf. He also worked for 25 years at the school and has been very active as a leader of the Historical Society and is a member of the Advisory Council. As was the case for the other two schools, the Advisory Council put forth this nomination. You may recall that the initial nominee withdrew, and so the Advisory Council reconvened and unanimously selected Mr. Autry for consideration with one member absent.
All right, are there any questions regarding Mr. Autry? He lives in Hickory, which is very close by, so I think that's great. And both of these items will be action on first read. Okay. Hearing no other discussion, let's move to so our discussion items for this month. So Ms. Picaro, can you talk to us about EICS 4, Dogwood Classical relocation?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a relocation request to a different LEA. Any relocation that is over 5 miles or that crosses over a county line would require state board approval. The school is Dogwood Classical Academy. They have had 2 delays. They are currently scheduled to open in fall of 2024. Year 1 would be K-5, 354 students. Their first delay was granted as a result of facility challenges, mostly related to cost in Cabarrus County. That was for which the county, the application was approved for, was Cabarrus County. They received a second delay last year pursuant to legislation that allows the tolling of a charter term due to delays in land use or development permits. And that was granted based on Dogwood providing evidence of sewer moratoriums in Cabarrus County. They have, over the last 2 years, they've searched for suitable solutions for temporary and permanent facilities in Cabarrus County. They have contacted over 100 churches. They had one that agreed could possibly be suitable for this school site, and they met with Cabarrus County several times, and they were recently alerted that they would not receive high usage sewer allocation until 2027. So, because that would makes moving to Cabarrus pretty impossible. The board voted in February 2023 to move from Cabarrus to Iredell County. They have identified a suitable property there that is less than 5 miles from the Cabarrus border. It's a former school facility previously operated by Iredell Statesville Schools. It's already zoned and has a CO for educational purposes. Dogwood Classical has presented data on Iredell County showing strong school-age population growth and racial demographics that are closely aligned to the anticipated demographics of the school, and which was in the application. So in other words, the county change from the 5 miles from Cabarrus to Iredell would not change the target population or any of that data in the application. The school is an NC Access Planning Grant recipient and will have a weighted lottery to give greater chance of entrance to economically disadvantaged students and to English language students. They have submitted documentation to CSAB, and then which has been submitted to your board as well, including demographic and population growth data for Iredell County, evidence of overcrowding in the district schools, property information on the potential site, and also evidence of having not been able to find or receive sewer allocations in Cabarrus County. They have also provided a financial update showing a surplus for the first 5 years. New board member details. They have a strong board of 9 members. They've submitted support from community members and local leaders from both counties, including local elected officials and retired members of the school system. As of May 23rd of this year, they had 601 students who have formally expressed interest in the school. And they are still expected to serve Cabarrus and Mooresville city schools, but they have adjusted their anticipated population enrollment to show higher amounts of Iredell students with this change. And we did reach out to Iredell County for an impact statement to give them that option of submitting one. We did not receive one here in the office. The request was submitted and presented to CSAB last month. There was a pretty lengthy discussion regarding this request because obviously it's a big change to move from one county to the other. And the CSAB did approve it unanimously, but they did put a little guardrail on it, a stipulation that they approved the request to relocate, but they only to a school that is not located north of Morrisville proper. So looking at the maps that were submitted, Iredell is kind of like a long rectangle, and CSAB was concerned about moving far north up into Iredell, which would be very different demographics and population growth than the Morrisville, kind of the southern area of Iredell County. And they put that stipulation on this relocation, but they did approve it. So that's kind of the summary of this request. I know it's a big request. Are there any questions I can take?
Mr. Butler?
Yes.
Just one quick question for Ashley. You mentioned their targeted population. What is their targeted population?
It's very similar to the demographics of Iredell Statesville schools. So they're projecting 59% white students. Iredell has about 63%, 16% African American, 17% Hispanic. The Hispanic population is the fastest growing population in that county. 4% Asian, 4% multiracial, 4% students with disabilities, 5% English language learners, and 23% free or reduced lunch. And those compared to Iredell are also in your information.
Okay, are there any other questions? We will talk about this again in August, and so we can have follow-up if anybody has any questions, if they'll reach out to Ms. Vaquero or Ms. Kamnitz or myself. Ms. Kamnitz and I looked at some maps trying to figure out where the original school was and where this one's going to be and how it's going to impact. We thought we might hear something from Iredell County, and obviously we have not. So if anybody has any concerns, if they will reach out to us, then we can discuss it at the August meeting.
Can I ask a question?
You sure may.
So I'm familiar with this school because I went to Davidson College, and you have to drive by it if you're going towards Mooresville. So I remember the school well, and it is an old school, and it looks like old school building. Now, when you turn on, that's when I started echoing. I just thought I would say that. It's an interesting location because originally this was supposed to be Cabarrus, and I think you said it was 4 or 5 miles from there.
Yeah, it's 4.7 miles from the original location.
I think it's about that close to Mecklenburg County. It's certainly that close to Mooresville, and it may be that close to Rowan County as well. So it's like 5 different systems potentially impacted by this particular location, which is quite different than the original location in the sense of who was trying to appeal to or who we're trying to get. So when we talk about impact, there could be multiple systems that may have input on impact just because of this somewhat unique location of being so close to so many school districts.
Yes, and so we would have originally sent an impact request to Cabarrus, and I would have to look and see if they ever submitted that with the original application. If they did, you would have seen that with the approval process. But we have reached out to Iredell, and then of course we are happy to reach out to if there's a specific county request. I think I read that there's maybe 7 counties that border Iredell. I did not know that. So yes, there are. They're anticipating based on the parent meetings they've had and kind of the community outreach that the majority of their population will be. I believe it's Cabarrus, Iredell, and then the Mooresville City Schools. But I believe that's also in their budget that they have submitted, is where they're kind of anticipating that draw of students.
Okay, any other questions regarding that? All right, we'll talk about it again next month. So EICS 5 is Union Day mission. Is that going to be you, Dr. Smith, or Dr. Mayer?
That's me. All right. So this is a mission statement request. All charter school mission statement changes are required to be approved by state board. So these are usually pretty simple. This is a school in Union County. They've been operating since 2016. They have currently 528 students in grades K through 9. And really exciting to know that they are the first charter school in the state to receive International Baccalaureate authorization. So they are an IB school. That is a pretty thorough and lengthy process that a school must undergo to become officially an IB school. And part of that is requiring a school's mission statement to speak to the IB learner profiles, which is kind of the core of that program. So their original mission statement was Union Day School will deliver a rigorous and content-rich education to a diverse community of students and a shared conviction that each student will achieve high-quality academic success and enriched personal growth. That was the original one. The school's board, the school's leaders worked very closely with the accrediting folks from the IB program to craft a new mission statement that met the requirements of the IB program. And the new mission statement is that Union Day School community works together to provide students rigorous content and a rich curriculum that is parallel with the International Baccalaureate ideals of the learner profiles. We strive to build a nurturing environment where each student demonstrates a spirit of respect, responsibility, global-mindedness, and a commitment to academic and civic excellence. So that's their change. They did say that by aligning their mission with the IB learner profiles, that it sends a powerful message to the school community that diversity is valued, celebrated, and seen as a source of strength within the educational community. And they hope that integrating the learner profiles into the mission statement serves as a guiding framework for their staff as they build out their IB program.
I think this is really exciting, and I compliment them on this. That's very exciting. Any questions about this? All right, that will come back before us next month. Okay, EICS 6. So draft eligibility criteria, standards, and procedures for admission to the schools for the deaf and the blind. Is this you, Dr. Jordan? I keep trying to give you something.
No worries. I'm going to defer to my colleagues on the general counsel side. They have been instrumental in helping to draft these rules, and we appreciate their support.
Good morning, everyone. This is Ryan Collins. I serve as Assistant General Counsel for the State Board. As you all are aware by now, through the nominations of the State Board appointments to the new boards of trustees for the North Carolina School for the Deaf, Eastern North Carolina School for the Deaf, and the Governor Moorhead School for the Blind, Session Law 2023-10, which was passed earlier this year, has changed the structure for how these schools will be governed. Among other things, the legislation required the State Board to adopt rules for admissions criteria and standards to each of these schools that will be in effect for the 2023-2024 school year. After that, once we transition over to the new boards of trustees, they will be responsible for adopting these criteria. But at least for this transition year, the State Board is charged with adopting those rules. What's important to note up at the top that this is not subject to the usual rulemaking process under the APA, so this simply requires approval by the State Board. So we have developed these admissions criteria in consultation with the staff here in DPI, with Dr. Jordan, Dr. Morrow, as well as the directors of each of the current directors of each of the schools. We largely attempted to align with the specific requirements that were set forth in the statute, as well as in looking at how other similar institutions that have adopted these types of criteria in other states, notably Florida, have established their rules. So what you will see here first under admissions criteria, we were specifically, the legislation specifically charged for inclusions of certain types of base criteria for a student to be eligible or to be able to be admitted to one of these schools. One of which was, and largely these were intended to address some of the challenges that these institutions had faced in terms of the types of students that were being enrolled there. So among the requirements is that the student possesses the minimum level of function necessary to participate in the educational programs offered by the school. At this point, I also just want to note that you have 3 different documents, one for each of the schools. They are all substantively identical. The only difference is, of course, the names of the institutions in each one, and then the definition of either hearing or vision impairment that's included with each of their respective schools. But at least in terms of these admissions criteria, they're largely identical across the 3 sets of rules. So as I was saying, the first one is the student possesses the minimum level of functioning necessary to participate in the educational programs offered by the school. And then there's a list of the specific functions that student must demonstrate that they possess. And again, these have been borrowed from similar criteria that are in place in Florida. Also, that the student does not pose a risk of harm to the student's self or to others, or pose a risk of substantial disruption to the learning environment at that school. And then lastly, that the student presents with either deafness or hearing impairment for the schools for the deaf, or with a vision impairment, and then that adversely affects that student's educational performance. So you'll see that the definition that we've included for each of those is consistent with how either deafness or hearing impairment or vision impairment are defined in the state education policies governing services for children with disabilities, and those definitions are also consistent with definitions in federal law. So we have attempted to provide some further guidelines for these schools, while also being consistent with how we have handled these matters and other aspects of the State Board's work. So those are those baseline criteria that the students will be expected to satisfy before they can be admitted to one of these institutions. In terms of the actual procedures, either a parent or a legal guardian on behalf of a student, or a public school unit in which the student is currently enrolled can apply to have that student considered for admission to one of these respective schools. There will be an individual admissions committee that is convened for each student's consideration. That will include a chair who's designated by the director of the school, the applicant's parent or legal guardian, and then any professional who has expertise in evaluating and interpreting data regarding the student's educational needs or their specific hearing or visual impairment. There's also an option, not a requirement, but an option that if the student is currently enrolled at a public school unit, then the chair can extend an invitation to that PSU to appoint a representative to be a part of that committee. There's certain information that the admissions committee has to consider, including, of course, the admissions criteria that I had previously discussed, evidence of, and as well as information about the student's current IEP, if they have one in place, in considering those needs. So ultimately, the admissions committee issues a recommendation on the application to the director of the school or anyone whom the director designates who shall make the final decision regarding admission. There's two types of potential admissions. One is a temporary assignment where the student is temporarily assigned to the school for no more than 90 days to allow the school staff to evaluate the student and gather additional information that would inform the admissions committee's final determination. And then there's the full educational program assignment to which they are admitted long-term into the program. There's also a provision that will allow a student to be disenrolled if at any point in the future the admissions committee reevaluates the student and determines that they are no longer satisfying the admissions criteria. And this would essentially follow the same procedures as initial admission, with the final decision resting with the director. With regard to the provision of a free, appropriate public education under the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, which was something that was discussed during the drafting of this legislation, these rules make clear that consistent with the law, the PSU in which the student was enrolled previously has the initial responsibility to identify the special needs of the students and provide a special education program and services in accordance with Article 9 of Chapter 115C of the General Statutes. If the student applies to and satisfies the admissions criteria in the determination of the admissions committee and the director, then the responsibility for providing that and maintaining the student's individual education plan does shift to that school. If in the event that the admissions committee subsequently determines the individual no longer meets those criteria and the student is disenrolled from the school, then the responsibility for the free appropriate public education would revert back to the PSU in which the student was previously enrolled. A quick note about this, we've received feedback from the directors and have looked at this, and there's a question about what happens if between the time that the student initially enrolls in one of these schools and when they are disenrolled, if that happens, the student's domicile changed, maybe the parent relocated to a different part of the state in order to be closer to the student if they're part of the residential program. We have been working with the General Assembly, and there is a pending technical corrections bill that would change that to that it would revert to the PSU that governs the student's domicile. That has not yet passed, so right now we are recommending rules consistent with the statute as currently written. And then lastly, again, consistent with the way the legislation was written, it directs parents that have following a final decision regarding an application for admission, if it's an adverse decision and the student is not admitted, the parents are encouraged to pursue mediation under Article 9 of Chapter 115C, as well as, and if the mediation doesn't work out, they'll go through a due process hearing consistent with that statute. So those are the admissions criteria that we have put together and proposed for y'all's adoption. Again, these are up for discussion for this month with final proposal or final vote to happen in August in order to meet the August 5th deadline, I believe it is, to have these criteria put in place. So with that, I will yield. I don't know if Dr. Jordan or anyone else has anything they want to add. Also happy to take questions.
Attorney Collins, thank you so much. I did want to note, Mr. Blackburn, that we have joining us today the 3 school directors, and so they are on hand should there be specific questions about how these rules would be applied at the school level.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Dr. Jordan. Does anyone have any questions? I've heard this presentation twice now, and I continue to be very impressed with what we're trying to accomplish here. And I commend the folks that have done this. And hopefully it will clear up some items that have obviously been an area which have caused some consternation in the past. So I'll open the floor. Any questions on this one? Hearing none, we will discuss it again in the August meeting and hopefully we'll adopt it. So thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Dr. Jordan.
Thank you.
We have one consent agenda item. That's the repeal of SBE policies related to North Carolina Innovative School District. Dr. Jordan, you really are at this time.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. Before you is a recommendation to repeal 6 policies related to the Innovative School District, as you know, by virtue of action by the state board. The lone school in the Innovative School District, Southside Ashpole, has been transitioned back to the public schools of Robeson County. We have concluded the approved transition plan in keeping with board action and state law. And as of June 30th, the Innovative School District has sunset. We are recommending that the related policies be repealed.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer.
Go ahead, Treasurer.
Thank you, John. When you spoke of this transition, I presume there's been a coordination with the Treasurer's Office in terms of any participants or employees at this school, whether they were in or whether they were out of the pension and the state health plan?
Yes, sir, Treasurer Falwell. We work very closely with staff in your agency, and they were very helpful in helping us work through the complexities associated with the transition and those benefits.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer, for always looking after our financial side of that picture. Anything else to come before us today? If not, Mr. Chair, I yield the floor back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. We'll now move to the Healthy Responsible Students Committee led by Mr. Reginald Keenan. Mr. Keenan. Mr. Keenan. I believe the HRS committee item for us today is dealing with the SBE policy amendment concerning middle school athletics. This was before us last month. Any staff present to report on any updates or changes on this matter?
Yes, sir. Mr. Davis, this is Ellen Essick. This was brought to you last month. It's really for a vote today. Again, no major changes to this other than clerical changes and the addition of mercy rules at the request of LEAs. So just asking the board for a vote on this.
Thank you, Dr. Essick. Any questions on this item? Okay, it will be before us later in our meeting for action. We'll now move on to the Government and Community Affairs Committee led by Mr. Wendell Hall. Mr. Hall.
Mr. Chairman, at this point in time, once again, we'll bring Mr. Falkenberry back online with us concerning the different bills that's before the General Assembly, not knowing where they are. We're really there on vacation this week, but I thought we could get an update from Falkenberry concerning the bills that have been passed, where they are, whether or not they're in the governor's office that is pertinent to the operation of the state board. Mr. Falkenberry, are you online yet?
Yes, sir.
Will you mind sharing with the board and the board members? You have the opportunity to ask any question concerning some of these bills that we're looking at. They will have an impact on how we operate in the future once they're ratified and signed into law. Leave it up to you, Ms. Falkenberry.
Well, thank you, Committee Chair Hall, and I appreciate the opportunity to walk everybody through what's been going on so far. I did want to give just a brief update since a lot of you are not in the Raleigh area, or you might not hear the news as frequently as we do. With what's going on with the General Assembly, but we have had 8 veto overrides so far. These are not all education related. Several bills have become law, or no, several, but a few laws have become law without the governor's signature as well. If bills are passing, it is almost certain that they will become law, or they would not be brought forward. We'll continue to see that, especially with some of the bills that got recent vetoes just yesterday. I tried to keep this presentation as up to date as possible, and I sent the presentation in yesterday around noon, and then shortly thereafter there were some more vetoes, which I'll discuss shortly. But the Senate has already said that they're kind of winding down their committee work. They want to get focused on the budget. And if they need to bring committee work and policy work, they'll do that as needed. But the House is still churning with their committee work. The K-12 Education Committee will have a hearing next Tuesday. Most of the bills, and this is what we're going to go over soon, that have passed that are related to education are kind of the bigger ticket items that probably get a lot more news. And it seems as though the General Assembly is focused on getting those bigger bills moved, negotiate those, and then we hope soon that the more policy bills that have been passing very bipartisan with almost unanimous support, principal licensure, computer science, teacher licensure, those sort of bills, we hope to see those being moved soon now that these other bills have started moving through the process and gone to the governor's desk. So the budget is still being negotiated as we speak. And if you, Dr. Peter-Martin, go 2 slides down. So what is the budget update? I took a screenshot of Michael Hyland, one of the Capitol reporters we have here. And this is a screenshot of what he put out last week. And he says the earliest that they anticipate a budget from Senator Berger's office is that July 24th week. So we're looking at towards the end of the month, possibly even the beginning of August. So I know that we do some year-round schools and some charter schools that start earlier, but we are looking to not have a certified budget before the start of the school year. So I know it causes some issues for especially like Alexis Schaus and her team at school business and definitely for our districts, but we are continuing to work with the GA to ensure that that we get a budget that reflects the requests from the State Board and DPI. All right. Next slide. Okay, so the bills being monitored, just briefly, because we've talked about these a lot. Career development plans, I foresee this most likely being in the budget since there is an appropriation attached to it. The budget request came from DPI and the State Board, and it was in both budgets. There was one slight tweak in the Senate budget that we would also consider SAT scores and ACT scores and APs as well. That was just kind of an oversight that we did not include in the original language, but we feel very confident since it was in both the House and Senate budgets, it will be in that one. And just a reminder that the nurse in every school, we did not see that in either one of the budgets, but there were a lot of pieces I think that are getting negotiated throughout the rest of this budget process. So we will continue to advocate for that. Computer science graduation requirement. This is one of the most bipartisan support bills and workforce development bills I've seen in a while with a lot of support at the GA. I think this is one of those policy bills that we will see moved sooner rather than later now that we've gotten some of the bigger bills that I'll talk about soon off to the governor's desk. Protect Our Students Act is waiting to be heard on the Senate floor as well. That made it out of Senate rules. Registered nurses in schools, that was in the Senate budget, but also found its way in a PCS, which is a big amendment on the House side for Senate Bill 411. And now that Senate Bill 411 is now in conference. So we will see what kind of shakes out there. But I have to believe that a lot of these kind of low-hanging fruit things that have been passed both the House and the Senate might get put in a package deal like this, especially since Senate Bill 411 had some of those provisions, which the registered nurses in schools, which to remind everyone, that allows for 2 years of schooling to become a qualified nurse in school. And then the school threat assessment teams, I do not think this was as of yesterday. I don't think this was signed into law yet, but this was presented to him. I'll double check on that. But when this does become law, we've talked with the committee and I've talked with Center for Safer Schools Director Karen Fairley. I think it would be very beneficial for the board to hear a really detailed presentation on this to see what type of positive impact this is going to have for our school districts. And this is a bill that Superintendent Truitt and our Director Karen Fairley has really worked with Representative Torbett on to get it right. It's been a multi-year process to get this done, and it was really great to see this voted on almost unanimously in both the House and Senate. So some of the other bills, principal licensure, I think this bill will hopefully be moved soon before the end of the month, now that those other bills I keep talking about have passed. Just a reminder to everyone, the Senate did have an amendment to this to increase the internship hours to 500. And it already has made it out of Senate rules. It's just waiting to be heard on the Senate floor. Next slide. All right, bills presented to the governor. So Parents' Bill of Rights, which was vetoed yesterday. And there's a lot of information. I know this is more for all your purposes. I think a lot of you have read this bill, and I do appreciate Chairman Davis and Vice Chairman Duncan for the letter that they did send to the General Assembly leadership, kind of raising the concerns that we have seen just on the implementation of this, particularly around which I think is the next slide, so I'll get to that in a minute, but particularly around the appeals process when it comes to the state board. But what you'll see here are the bullet points of really what this bill does, and for the general public and for the board members to know, a lot of this bill was already in general statute, whether it was in the I think it's 114A, which is like the judicial side, 115C, and what the Senate had done is they kind of packaged everything into one bill to say that here's all the statutes, we're bringing them together to call this the Parents' Bill of Rights. Now, there are new provisions that we had not seen before in general statute that are now in this bill that we will see what happens with the veto override. But the big ones I did want to focus on is the last two bullet points that requires healthcare practitioners to obtain written consent from parent and minor before providing treatment. And the bill would require parental review and affirmation consent prior to administration of a protected information survey to a child by a public school unit. It also, where is it up here? It also requires parents to be informed if a child changes their pronouns at school so that they're aware of the changes in their child's life. So these are the new provisions that have gotten a lot of attention from the news and from politicians, and we'll continue to see what happens. Now, there was a last-minute amendment by Representative Sain to push back the effective date. I believe the original effective date was going to start when it became law, or July 1st. The new effective date is only pushed out to mid-August, so about 6 weeks. But this was to give some time because some stakeholders, including the department, raised some concerns just about what this means for surveys that go out and data collection that we get from those surveys and how that impacts federal guidelines and federal money that flows through the state. So we will continue to work with our General Assembly partners as we address those concerns, but there are several stakeholders across the state that are looking into that. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, that was the only amendment that was taken on the House side after it went through committee. There were several amendments that were proposed during the House session. Then they recessed to allow the Democrats and Republicans to caucus. And during the caucus time, and this is all on the House floor when it was discussed, but the speaker and the minority leader were discussing that this bill had already been determined and pre-compromised, I guess you could say, by the Senate and House leadership. And so therefore they were not going to allow any more amendments other than that effective date to be heard during the floor debates. And so the bill is what we see it as now. If you go to part 2 of the bill, these are the kind of concerns that Chairman Davis and Vice Chair Duncan presented to Senate and House leadership last week. And just to kind of reemphasize what they kind of put in there is that governing boards, governing bodies, LEA and charter boards, are to adopt procedures and policies when parents have concerns. If those are unresolved after 30 days, they have to provide a written statement for the lack of resolution. And at that point, the parent can do one of 2 things. They can go to court, ask for declaratory judgment, or they can request a parental concern hearing before the State Board of Education and have that matter reviewed by a hearing officer. It's a little vague with what all that involves, and it also requires the LEAs to pay for the hearing officer, but there's no mechanism that we see right now, and working with Allison Schaefer, the attorney, on how to collect that money, and what if you don't pay the money for the hearing officer. Those are the sort of things I think need to be hammered out over the coming months. And so we will continue to work with the GA to kind of try to enact a law that if this does go with the veto override, enact the law how they intended, but also to ensure that they understand that there are certain things in there that just might be out of our control with collecting the money, and then what's the punishment or the ruling by the state board is decided from the recommendation of the hearing officer, how that really gets implemented effectively. And then the other thing that we've noticed is, and I'm going to pull up my notes right here, is in Senate Bill 49, it requires the Department of Public Instruction to review and update all the guidelines for school counseling frameworks and standards, educator practices and professional conduct principle, other student services, and school personnel guidelines, standards, or framework. And then right after that, it says that the section is effective when it becomes law and applies the beginning of the 23-24 school year. However, the law states that the department shall review and update as necessary through June 30th or by June 30th, 2024. So when this law becomes effective, the department has the opportunity to update this, but we potentially might have a lag from when the law goes into effect from when it is issued on the guidelines. So those are some other things that we're working through right now, and we will continue to work with the leadership at DPI once this bill does become, if it does get overrun by the governor. What was interesting, it was a party line vote. I don't believe there was one Democrat who voted in favor of it that was there. There were several members on both the House and the Senate that were gone that day for excused absences, but there was one Republican who did vote against the bill. And as we know, they do have supermajorities, and the supermajorities are exactly the 72. So we will see how that all shakes out. I'll pause there. I don't know if Chairman Davis or Vice Chairman, if you want to comment more on this.
No, I don't have any other comment. Thanks. I don't have any other comment, but I did want to ask about one earlier part of the bill. Are you saying in the previous slide that there's a provision that effectively would eliminate use of the youth risk behavior survey? So what it does is it requires, it struck out opt-in and it requires for an opt-out. Opt-out is for an opt-in. So districts will have to notify parents of that. Do you want your child to take this survey, rather than, hey, we're taking the survey, let us know if you don't want them to take it. I think there's several stakeholders and agencies across the state that are trying to dissect what this means on the information that we collect as a state and present to the federal government, and if that has any impact on the federal money that we get or any other grants that are out there. And so that is why they extended the date through mid-August, so they can continue to kind of research that and see what's best for the state. All right. Well, fundamentally, that's very important information that I know that this board has valued greatly when we've been able to get it. And it's been just in the last cycle, it's become more difficult to get. I expect this bill is reflective of some public thought in that regard. But it's going to be a loss of really important information, I suspect, because getting that number of people to opt in will, and to still meet the necessary numbers for a valid survey, is going to be extremely difficult.
We agree too, and I've been talking with Dr. Marr and his team on what the impacts could be. I've talked with DHHS. I think everybody is trying, and I think that's why the date was extended, so we could kind of see what the ramifications are for specifically that survey and some other federal surveys that are mandated throughout the country. But I'll continue to keep you all abreast of the situation.
I also believe, fellow board members, that this is one of those items that once it's approved in whatever stage, that we need to have some detailed information on it as to what it is and what it is not. Mr. Falkenberry, that hearing officer that you talked about, is that still in the law about him or her being board certified or counselor licensed? Just where is that part?
Yes, that's still part of it, and they have to have education experience as well. And there's only so many people that can do that, but I know that Allison Schaefer and her team have been really studying that part of the bill.
It's going to be to find someone with all those qualities. That's going to be difficult as a hearing officer. But anyway, we'll just see once it if it becomes law as presently in its present form. What's next?
All right, next one.
Chair Hall, I have a question.
Yes.
If we're still taking questions.
We are. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Falkenberry, for this update. A little bit more clarification. This is going to go back. You don't have to really, let me just summarize the point. It had to do with parents being notified when their student changes the pronoun. I think that may have been several slides back. But does the bill address any recourse for the parents? I mean, can they come to the school and argue that happening, or is there what is the right of the parent, I guess is my question.
So that's kind of the appeals process that we've laid out. We hope that most of these are figured out at the local level. And so if a parent has a concern, they can address that, and the district has up to 30 days to resolve it. After that, it goes, they have an appeals process. So that's what our hope is. But I think also is that I do think there might need to be some messaging that goes out to, and we've talked to the School Board Association about this and stuff too, but this bill does not allow parents who are upset that their kid got zoned to a different school, that they can now come appeal that to the state board. So this is really left to what's in the bill about the, if you scroll up one slide, Dr. Pucci-Martin, really if it hits on these issues right here, that's what it that's where the appeals process has really come from. There's some other ones too that are nuanced, and I can send you a bill summary, and if you want to skim through that. But I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it does. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay.
Next one, Charter School Review Board. This one was presented to the governor last week. I checked it this morning. It still has not been vetoed or signed into law, but it went through the House. We've discussed this bill in great length before, but there was one major amendment to this bill, and that was in the Senate, and then it went back to the House to be concurred with, is that it took away the state superintendent's designee as a voting member and made them a advisory position again, just like it is on CSAB currently. The reason for this was that they felt that if the superintendent had a vote both during the process and it was one of the people that can make an appeals, that would give that person or that designee pretty much unchecked power. So we are, that's where it is. And to remind everybody, the appeals process for this, if it becomes law, is the charter school can appeal, and as well as the superintendent can appeal the decision. Now, if you could scroll down just a little bit because of the subtext. Okay, just right there, yep. And then there was also a floor amendment in House Bill 219, which is the Charter Omnibus Bill, which we'll discuss in a minute, but since it has to do with this, I'll include it here. What it did do is it staggered the terms for both CSAB and the review board. So if the review board goes into a law, it'd be the same thing. But we've had issues in the past, and this is something the department and the Office of Charter Schools has advocated for years, is to we'd have everybody would roll off at the same time, so you wouldn't have any continuity at CSAB or if the review board becomes law. So now it would stagger the terms so they'd be a 2 and 4 year, and then they would continue to be 4 year after that. So that's something to keep in mind. All right. Next bill. Okay. All right. So, well, 1 second, let me pull up something. So the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, I believe this was vetoed by the governor yesterday as well. This would, we've discussed this one in great detail before, but I did want to highlight that if this does become law, and with a veto override, it did receive a lot of bipartisan support, or significant bipartisan support, well above the threshold for supermajorities. And it does require and I highlight this part, the SB would be required to monitor middle and high school athletics for compliance. If the state board finds a school in violation, it must report this to JLOC. That would be sort of the big reporting due from the state board. And so if this becomes law, North Carolina would, I think, join 22 other states who have already passed similar law. What I did find interesting, though, with this is in the Senate, Senate Democrat, Senator Applewhite, when they asked why she voted for this one, and it was interesting, she said she had reached out to some of the members of the LGBTQ community who said they understood it as well. And her quote was that she thinks it's a misnomer to think that everyone in that community feels the same way and they're not one groupthink. So I don't see her changing her vote on this one. So it would receive some bipartisan support, but we will see what happens when it comes to that time. All right, next slide.
Before you leave that.
Yes, sir.
I'm looking at the state board will be required to monitor middle and high schools for compliance. I think we talked about this earlier. I just wonder how we're going to do that.
Yeah.
I mean,
so in the bill there, it does lay it out. They're supposed to, I believe districts are supposed to notify the state board by a certain date, and then the state board then does that. But since the state board oversees the High School Athletic Association, there should be some constant communication going on between both entities.
So we'll both pull up from the PSU.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's being perceived that way. Okay, thank you.
All right. Charter Omnibus Bill. This, I believe, okay, so this is the previous version, just so you can all see it. And if you see the green, that's what was changed. So if we just want to go to the next slide. Just so everyone knows, comparable funding was taken out of it completely. And this bill is going to be calendared next Tuesday in the House. So we assume that it will pass and then be sent to the governor. So the limit enrollment caps to low performing schools. This used to say, I believe it used to have that low performing schools can go above the 20% threshold. This now says they can go up to 20%, but they have to receive state board and or charter school review board a permission to go above 20% if they're low performing. The Senate made that change. The other two changes was the last one down here, part 8, the technical correction I already talked about with the review board and the CSAB. And then the other one, which I thought was interesting, was allow the Central Park School for Children in Durham to conduct a weighted lottery, admissions lottery pilot. And Senator Woodard, who's a Democrat from Durham County, had advocated for this, and he actually did vote for this bill when it was heard on the Senate floor. So we will continue to monitor this as it goes to the governor's desk, probably after next Tuesday. Okay, so the bills that have not moved, I'll just go through these real quickly. The school athletic transparency, this has not moved. It has not even been voted on in committee. After making it out of the Senate, it's been discussion only in House K-12. I'll continue to keep everybody posted on this one if and when it does move. And the constitutional amendment for this state board chair and for state board members has not moved out of rules still. And teacher licensure changes have not moved. These are one of those bills where I would have to assume that we will see something by the end of session because they're practically the same bill on both the House and Senate. And so they both agree to it. We just haven't seen it put in a vehicle to vote through committees yet. And then the remote and virtual charter, it used to be just the remote and virtual charter bill, and then the Senate added on the community college president confirmation. This is now finally in conference committee. The House sat on this bill for a little while and then agreed not to concur, and then it went to conference. And so we will see if anything comes out of this conference committee. Next one. So I try to do this as succinctly as possible. Any questions? Any comments?
Anyone? And Mr. Falkenberg, let me go back quickly. We talked about the internship, the 500 hours for principals.
Yes.
The 500 is minimal.
Minimum, yes, sir.
It can go beyond that with state board action. Am I correct?
You are correct. The minimum of 500 hours gives the state board the authority to go above and beyond that.
I wanted to make sure that was still some flexibility there. Okay. Anyone else? I'm sure that when we get back together next month, we will be talking about some of these same bills and where they are and how we will react to them. And I thank you and your staff for work on this particular item along with the legal department. We won't talk about some of the athletic issues now until we hear more. My questions on that.
Yes.
Again, anyone else with any questions concerning what's been shared today?
Well, Chairman Hall, just real quick, you mentioned the lawyers. There is one bill I did not even talk about because Allison Schaefer is going to do an incredible job during BizUp, but I just want to thank her team and Ryan over there for their help finessing all this stuff as best we could, but specifically on the paternity leave item that's going to be brought up during BizUp. We work real closely with them and with House and Senate leadership to make sure that was phrased correctly in the law so there would be no ambiguity for districts and charters, and look forward to that conversation that you will have during BizUp.
Okay. Thank you, sir. At this time, Mr. Chairman, I give the floor back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. We'll now move to the Educator Standards and Practice Committee led by Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the ES&P Committee of the State Board of Education. I want to take just a second or two to also welcome Dr. Donna Tipton-Rogers, who is going to vice chair this committee. I'm happy to have her. She has deep knowledge in terms of higher education, being president of a community college, so she will certainly be an asset. So we have this month three action items, and the first item is ES&P 1, the SBE public policy amendment dealing with changes. These are vendor-driven changes in the State Board of Education license test for licensing. So it's just Dr. Kim Evans is going to do a quick presentation, and she's just going to highlight some of the changes that she has made in the display of these deadlines, effective dates and deadlines of these tests. So Dr. Evans, you can just take a minute or two and go through the table.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. So what you see here is a matrix to introduce the Exceptional Children Testing Update, and you can see that there were 3 tests that are the current tests and when the ending date will be for those tests, and then what the updated test would be, and then the start date for those updated tests. And this is also to provide clarity to the field, especially exceptional children teachers and other staff that support those teachers.
Okay, very good. Any questions or comments from my colleagues on the board? If not, then that item is going to be coming to us later for approval. The next item is also an action item. It's ES&P 2, and this is the policy amendment general licensure requirements relative to the federal provision known as the Veterans Act and Education Improvement Act. This is a very good item. I'm just so happy that it's coming to our attention for our approval. And it's clearly written out in the board material that you have. You see a lot of things in red that represent some changes. And so Dr. Tomberlin is just going to walk us through what he has there on the screen.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. So this, as we covered last month with the board, this is a federal provision which allows a military person or the spouse of a military person to leverage an out-of-state license while they're on military orders to North Carolina. So during this time, we would grant salary authorization to the service member or his or her spouse based on an out-of-state license. If the license holder chooses to remain in North Carolina past the military orders, he or she would be covered for the remainder of that academic year. But if they wanted to pursue a North Carolina license, they would then be held to the requirements to hold a North Carolina educator's license. And I'm happy to take any questions that board members might have.
Are there any questions? If none, we will move on to the third action item. And this is pertaining to the report to the North Carolina General Assembly relative to the teacher bonus program report. And this is an annual report that has a report that is required in law. Dr. Tomberlin will take us through any changes or any specific things that he would like to highlight in this item. Dr. Tomberlin.
Yes, thank you very much. So this bonus program is an annual program. It was been on hold for the prior 2 years because of COVID and the scarcity of testing of our students. But it does cover teachers who teach in 3rd grade reading, 4th and 5th reading, and 4th through 8th grade math. And that those in the top 25% of the state or the LEA are eligible for a bonus. In order to qualify, the employee must remain serving in that school district until January 1st of the following year. They don't have to teach the same subject, but they have to remain employed with that LEA. And the General Assembly in the update to this bonus report asked some specific questions that they wanted answered about the bonuses. And this report does cover those questions, particularly the statistical relationship between qualifying for the bonus, receiving the bonus, and remaining in the LEA. We did not see, in this round, we did not see that relationship being affected by the bonus. We saw those folks that left to be pretty consistent with the mobility rate across the state. And so that doesn't mean that it's not effective. It just doesn't mean we observed it in this iteration. presumably the General Assembly will continue to ask us that question, and we can get some longitudinal data on that particular question. The rest of this is those relationships that were asked by the General Assembly are included in the report, as well as a complete breakdown of the bonus distribution across the state down to the school level. And board members can look at that. That is a public dashboard that we've created because to put it on paper would make for an extremely long document. So we've decided to put that into a dashboard where people can drill down and look at particular schools if they choose to. And I'm happy to take any questions about this analysis in this report.
Are there any questions? It's a very good report, and I would recommend that it's a long report, but I would recommend board members and others, if you have the time to go through it. I think the findings are fascinating, and I wonder, Dr. Tomberlin, if one of the reasons for the study was to answer some questions about the impact of a bonus on retention.
I presumably that the bonus itself, that is one of the articulated outcomes of providing the bonus, was to help retain these highly effective teachers in the LEA in which they earned that designation. It remains to be seen if there's. An interesting question would be if the current bonus is not accomplishing that goal. What is the tipping point? What would the bonus need to be in order to forestall that movement from one LEA to another? Which I would find to be an interesting question. I hope the General Assembly finds that an interesting question to raise in further reports.
They could. Very well. Very good. If there are no questions or comments from my colleagues, we will go to the last item, which is a consent item. And Dr. Tomberlin, just take a minute, even though this is a consent item, just take a minute or two to refresh our thinking and our memory about this outcomes for the Central Carolina Teaching Initiative, and that grant has been retired, but this is the summative evaluation. This is the final report from that initiative.
That is correct. And I do want to preface my comments with saying I am not the author of this report, so any of these comments are my gleaning from reading the report and do not reflect those of the author. The Central Carolina RESA is an approved EPP now, so it no longer falls under this experimental or local designation that requires the evaluation. So this is the final outcome, the final summative evaluation of that process. What the report generally says, by and large, is this initiative, this preparation program, is functioning very similar to other non-IHE affiliated ed prep programs. So I want to be clear about that. This does not have a formal connection to a university. This is a non-institute higher ed educator prep program. So if you want to think about Teachers of Tomorrow or #Teach or some of our other non-IHE EPPs, the comparisons were largely drawn from this CCTI to those institutions. And it does seem to be functioning very similarly. The reports from this, the positive reports from the school districts that this initiative is serving, which I think now is just Wake and Durham counties, used to serve more in the central region, but it's become a little more narrow in its focus. But there was nothing particularly alarming about anything that came out of this study. It seems to be a highly functioning ed prep program serving those two LEAs well. And in the future, they will, in the present and in the future, they will fall under the regular EPP accountability model. So this report is a final report.
And the state board is being asked to receive that report. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tomberlin, and your team for the reports and the hard work that you committed to the July meeting. And with that said, I will turn the floor back over to you, Chair Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. That brings us to the Business Operations Committee led by Vice Chair Alan Duncan. Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I want to welcome our new Vice Chair, who we work together now, John Blackburn, who's already had a busy start of his tenure. When Wendell Hall announced the acceptance of his free agency contract over the HRS committee, there was, as you would imagine, a frenzy of applications to get onto BizOp. And Chair Davis was wise enough to select John for his business acumen and background, and we're thrilled to be able to work together. We have several items. First one is BizOp 1, which is a action on first read. This is a contract that involves the North Carolina Alliance for School Leadership. It is the AP Assistant Principal Leadership Accelerator Program. Barry Wallace, our special advisor for principal engagement for the superintendent, is here to report on that contract.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Right. I stand before you today regarding amendment number 1 to contract number 40 PR 122-44043, the Assistant Principal Leadership Accelerator. The original contract was $306,000 to serve and coach assistant principals in Title I schools. We have since increased the cohorts to include non-Title I schools funded by ESSER dollars. This amendment has increased the total contract for the AP Accelerator to $606,000, eclipsing the $500,000 threshold. Therefore, we stand in front of you for approval so we can proceed. And I'll just remind all those that assembled, this aligns to State Board of Education Goal 2, Objective 9, to increase the number of highly effective principals and assistant principals in the pipeline. Chair.
Thank you. And you have reported it's been very successful thus far in the work that's been done. Are there any questions on this? Let's move on then to BizOp 2, which is our Innovative Partnership Grant, fiscal year 24, cohort 3, competitive grant recommendations. And we have Alex Charles, our new interim director for the Office of Federal Programs, and Dr. Pauletta Thompson, our education program administrator, to report on this item.
Good morning. We come before you today to bring our recommendations for the Innovative Partnership Grant, IPG Cohort 3. So next slide, please. So under Section 1003 of the Every Student Succeeds Act has mandated the state set aside 7% of their Title I funds to support federal school improvement. In North Carolina, we divide that 7% up into 2 funding streams, PRC 105, which supports our Comprehensive Support and Improvement Schools, or CSI schools, and PRC 115, which is why we're here today, which is also known as the Innovative Partnership Grant. This is a competitive grant that is awarded on top of the PRC 105 or the CSI funds to help spark school transformation. So next slide. So when looking at the IPG grant for this year, the intent was to become more focused. So this competition was designed to provide the opportunity for CSI Tier 2 schools to receive that increased support. So CSI Tier 2 schools are the CSI schools who did not exit CSI status during the most recent exit year. And with the support provided through IPG, the CSI Tier 2 schools will receive a more robust support system to hopefully help them overcome the barriers to help them with the goal of helping them exit CSI status. So next slide. So I'm now going to turn this presentation over to Dr. Pauletta Thompson, which will walk us through the IPG process and review.
Good morning. I will be providing a general overview of the FY24 Innovative Partnership Grant Program competition to get us started. On December the 12th, the Office of Federal Programs hosted a statewide webinar for PSUs. And during this webinar, PSUs were provided just an overview of the grant program, as well as staff announced the potential upcoming competition and reviewed the intent to apply process. After receiving board approval for the FY24 competition and approval of the request for proposals, the application window opened for the competition in CCIP. The application ran from February the 8th through April the 12th for all of the eligible CSI Tier 2 schools. A few items to note during this process. Between December 12th and January the 31st, we received 30 intent to apply forms from the eligible schools. And during the application window, NCDPI staff engaged in lots of engagement with the eligible PSUs. NCDPI staff held a recorded technical assistance webinar, which went over each component of the grant application and the scoring requirements. That recording was posted on the Office of Federal Programs website and emailed directly to the federal program directors and school principals for all of the eligible schools. Email reminders about the competition timeline and important dates were also shared during this time with all eligible applicants. 3 monthly office hour sessions were also held throughout the application window. And after the final office hour session, NCDPI staff updated an FAQ as questions were received, and that FAQ was also emailed daily to eligible applicants. And on the final day of the application window, NCDPI staff contacted each applicant that started an application via phone or email to remind them of the noon deadline and to help troubleshoot any lingering questions. PSUs shared an appreciation for the level of support that they received during the application process. At the end of the application window, applications were received from 15 CSI Tier 2 schools across 6 regions. After the window closed, applications were reviewed independently as a level 1 quality review by 3 individuals on an external panel from our contract with the Serve Center. Those scores were averaged to produce 1 score per application, and the scored applications were then placed in a rank order by SBE region to determine those top applications from each region that met the minimum requirements. The total top 6 applications were then identified, and the Office of Federal Program staff then conducted a level 2 review of all the applications to determine the final recommendation for the board, which constitutes the level 3 quality review. Next slide, please. The applications received and reviewed are listed here in Table 1 for you. You'll note that per the request for proposals in the FY24 IPG grant competition, regions were determined eligible if 1 or more public school units within the region had 1 or more schools with the federal designation of CSI Tier 2 and were not currently or previously funded as an IPG school. So the Northeast region did not have any eligible CSI Tier 2 schools, and the Sandhills region had 1 CSI Tier 2 school, but that school chose not to submit an application. In addition, it's important to note here that in addition to being designated as CSI Tier 2 schools, of the 15 applications that were submitted, 14 of those schools are served as Title I schools, and 1 school is eligible to receive Title I funds, though the local PSU has chosen not to serve that school in this academic year. Next slide, please. In order to be more equitable in the awarding of funds across SBE regions, we included in the request for proposals that at least 1 FY24 partnership grant would be awarded to 1 eligible SBE region pending a quality application by at least 1 eligible school in the region and following the level 1 and level 2 review. And for the purposes of this IPG grant cycle, applications needed to fall within the excellent, strong, or average quality range to be considered for funding. As displayed in Table 2 here, all 15 applications received fell within the accepted quality range of excellent to average. Next slide, please. Additionally, as indicated in the RFP, after regional awards are identified, additional schools may be recommended based on the total application score and ranked without regional consideration. Since all applications met the quality band threshold for funding, the Office of Federal Programs verified sufficient funding availability during the duration of this grant cycle and has now provided that recommendation for funding for all 15 schools that applied for the FY24 Innovative Grant Partnership. Next slide, please. NCDPI recommends a total of 15 schools in 8 PSUs across 6 regions for funding. The total amount of funding recommended by each SBE region is shown on Table 4. Next slide, please. As a component of the Innovative Partnership Grant, each awarded school may spend up to 25% of the annual grant award to contract with an external partner. And the purpose of the external partner is to assist with the implementation of grant program initiatives. Schools were required to thoroughly vet each potential partner before making a selection, and the evaluation process for those external partners was reviewed during the quality review process. Each of the selected partners has demonstrated prior success in CSI and or IPG schools across our state by providing evidence-based practices to support program goals. And each of the PSUs were able to determine based on their program needs. 7 of the 15 recommended schools will enter into a partnership or a contract with Ed Direction. Ed Direction will provide customized services and supports to meet the IPG program goals in the areas of focused and coherent leadership, intentional teaching, effective collaboration, and inclusive culture. 6 of the 15 schools will contract with Opportunity Culture Public Impact. Opportunity Culture Public Impact will provide customized services and supports as well to meet program goals by reimagining school-based leadership and advanced roles through team-based teaching structures. And finally, 1 of the schools will contract with Good Seed Education Solutions. Good Seed Education Solutions, in collaboration with the Urban Collaborative at UNC Charlotte, will provide customized services and supports to meet the IPG program goals in the areas of school culture, climate, and leadership development to increase teacher efficacy. Now, while the IPG schools will be working directly with these external partners, the Office of Federal Programs will monitor the impacts of these partnerships, and NCDPI will retain the authority to mandate a shift in partner if the external partner does not support the IPG goals as obligated. Next slide, please. In conclusion, NCDPI recommends the 15 schools displayed on Table 6 for the FY24 Innovative Partnership Grant Award. Thank you so much. Are there any questions?
Chair Davis, this is Olivia. I do have a question.
Yes, please.
Thank you. With regard, and thank you so much for this very detailed report of the process of selection and all that went into that. I know it was labor intensive. My question is, the external partners that you mentioned, how are they determined? For instance, you mentioned one, I didn't take all the notes, but one is called a Good Seed.
Yes, schools are able to, or PSUs are able to evaluate and thoroughly vet partners based on the needs of their Innovative Partnership Grant Program. And so each will undergo a variety of evaluation measures to vet their external partners.
Okay, so there isn't these external partners is not an exclusive list given to them?
No, not at this time, no.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. One of the applicants on here is Zeka School, and you'll recall we just recently approved them for 3 more years with their charter application, and had some conditions applied. The office was very careful to make sure that the conditions were in. It was not an issue at all to be able to be qualified for this grant and still meet those conditions. So In fact, it hopefully will help meet the conditions. I just wanted to highlight that the office has looked at that issue as well. Any other questions or comments? All right, not hearing any. Thank you very much for the report and for the work that went into it.
Thank you so much.
We now move to BizOp 3, which is our annual, fortunately annual, U.S. Department of Agricultural Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program. We have a large number of recommended schools this year based on the applications, and Dr. Lynn Harvey is here to give us a report on that.
Good almost afternoon to you, and greetings from the State Boardroom, where we miss you today. We appreciate the opportunity to share with you again the recommendations for the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program. This is the 20th opportunity I've had to come before the board and tell you what a wonderful program this is in helping children to develop healthful eating habits. As you may recall from previous discussions, the fresh fruits and vegetables provided for this program are not part of the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs. They are instead provided to students as fresh fruit and vegetable snacks throughout the day. The goal of the program, of course, is to help students develop healthful eating habits throughout the instructional day, not just in the meal service. As you may also recall, the guidance for selection of schools for this process is established very clearly in federal guidance. The guidance specifically requires the state agency to notify all eligible elementary schools that they may make application. The selection is based upon those schools with the highest percentage of economically disadvantaged students, and that's reflected in the highest percentage of students who are eligible for free or reduced price meals at school, or the highest identified student percentage, which is a provision of the community eligibility provision. In both instances, this information, the data are ranked highest to lowest eligibility determination based upon economic disadvantage circumstances, and then funds are distributed to eligible schools for as far as the funds will go. We're happy to tell you this year that we are going to be able to award funds to all 262 schools that made application. This includes 34 public school districts and 1 charter school. Our grant award is approximately for $6 million, so we look forward to sharing this on a per pupil basis with those schools that you find listed in your table of recommendations. We continue to be pleased by the direction this program takes. I must take one moment just to give a shout out to Zoe McKay Tucker, who is our Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program Coordinator, who I can assure you has nurtured this program just as she has, as if it were her third child. So we are in good stead in implementation of the program and oversight of the program, and in the joy that we see in knowing that children are having access to fresh fruits and vegetables they may not have otherwise had because of limitations to those in many communities throughout the state. So thank you for your consideration of our recommendation.
Thank you for the work that's gone into this. As always, it's welcome news to be able to partner with our local communities and farmers and work together to bring fresh food to our children, and this is very beneficial to the various units around the state that are participating in the program. So we appreciate all the work that your department does to make this grant really successful on an annual basis.
Thank you. It's our privilege.
Any questions or comments on this? All right. It's nice to celebrate happy news. Go on to BizOp 4. Back to the pure business now. Pre-approval of financial and business services manuals. And the recommendation here is going to be for the state board to pre-approve the state Board of Education policy manuals for any adjustments being made now as through the legislative process for North Carolina Public School personnel state salary schedules, North Carolina Public School allotment policy manual, North Carolina Public School attendance and student accounting manual, and the North Carolina benefit and employment policy manual for public school employees. This is, for background, something we do annually just once we know we may get a budget. So we need to move quickly for our districts, and so we try to facilitate that process. And Jennifer Bennett is here to guide us through that.
In the absence of Jennifer, I can fill in that I think you explained the item very well. It is just providing us authority to implement those legislative items. Specifically, really, salary and benefits is really the biggest item.
Again, this is an annual process that Alexis has overseen for a number of years, and Jennifer has helped us with very much. So are there any questions or comments about this? All right, not hearing any. Those are the end of our actions on first read. We now have two discussion items before us, and they both really relate to the same topic, which is the 2023 Senate Bill 20, which is the paid parental leave aspect of that bill. We have BizOp 5 is the approval of proposed administrative rules, and this is a discussion item because this legislation is still finalizing. And then BizOp 6 will be the state board policy amendments related to this new legislation from for our North Carolina Public School Employees Benefit and Employment Policies manuals. But Allison Schaefer and Ryan Collins have BizOp 5, and I'm going to introduce Tom Tomberlin and Ryan Collins for BizOp 6 because this presentation will flow between the two these two items.
Good afternoon, members of the board. This is Allison Schaefer. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new law and then about what we are proposing you consider as rules in light of the new requirements. So in May, next slide, in May of 2023, the General Assembly enacted as part of a larger bill a new statute that is in Chapter 126, which is the State Personnel Act statutes. And this new statute, 126-8.6, provides a requirement to offer all state employees paid parental leave under the circumstances described in the statute. It includes all employees of state agencies, and with some limitations we'll discuss later, departments and institutions, including the University of North Carolina, and community college employees, but also all public school employees. So this is a benefit that is now not extending just to state employees, but also to public school employees. The leave entitles the following people to take this paid leave. It extends to a parent of a newborn biological child, a newly placed foster child, or a child under the age of 18 who's otherwise legally placed, or an adopted child. I missed that one. So newborn, adopted, and foster children, and anyone else legally placed, such as a guardianship, which would be a court order of a placement in a child in a home that does not qualify under one of those other things. The State Human Resources Department of State Human Resources, the State Human Resources Commission was required to adopt rules and policies that provided for permanent full-time employees to have paid parental leave for up to 8 weeks after giving birth. So the birth parent would be entitled to 8 weeks of paid parental leave, and other parents would be entitled to qualifying events for up to 4 weeks of paid leave for paternity leave, adoption leave, fostering a child, or becoming a legal guardian. So basically that's the requirement. It also requires part-time state employees be given a prorated amount of paid leave up to 4 weeks after giving birth for a birth parent, or up to 2 weeks for another qualifying event. That actually has been corrected or changed in the technical corrections bill, which we just discovered this morning, was passed as part of a DHHS agency bill. So I'm going to make note of those things as we go through. When we bring this back before you for action at your August meeting, we will make those changes to comply with the newly passed technical corrections. The statute also requires that the state board make rules. Those boards governing these different groups would have to make rules that are substantially similar to the OSHR rule. State Board of Education is required, therefore, to adopt rules and policies for paid parental leave for public school employees that are in line with the state level rules. That's what we are bringing forward to you today for discussion and will be for action in August. The parental leave has to be available to public school employees without exhaustion of the employee's sick or vacation leave. So this is in addition to other leave that parents can take still, but could have taken in the past. Other leave that's authorized by state or federal law. We go now to the next slide, which is talks about several revisions to the state laws that govern public schools K-12. That's the 115C chapter. It says that those are provide that in addition to paid parental leave entitlements, these employees of the state of the schools may use annual leave, personal leave, or leave without pay to care for a newborn child or a child placed for adoption or foster care. Again, what this means is you get 8 weeks of paid leave if you give birth to a child. Then you can also take whatever other leave you're entitled to take, such as personal leave, annual leave, or leave without pay. In the case of a parent who has been given birth, there's also an entitlement to take sick leave to the extent that it is applicable. So again, this allows parents more pay or more paid time off where they might have taken leave without pay otherwise. Next slide is the slide about sick leave for the birth of a child or a child placed for adoption. You can also take up to 30 days of sick leave for that. So that's already been in statute, and that is. Then this doesn't cover a birthing mother because the child is already, the mother's already allowed to take 30 days of sick leaves as sort of an understood. That's the sick leave time that has traditionally been taken. The statute also allows for the use of sick leave for childcare to be consecutive during the first 12 months after the birth or placement of a child, unless their Board of Education and the employee agree otherwise. And you will also see that will be true of the paid parental leave. It's consecutive work days unless it is going to be an agreement pursuant to an agreement by the employee and the employer. Finally, or not almost finally, the General Assembly specifically appropriated the sum of $10 million in recurring funds to the Department of Public Instruction to fund this paid parental leave. This is the only agency that receives any funding for this benefit. And this funding is intended to cover substitute teachers. And that has been clarified in the technical corrections bill, that this will be used, this will be used to fund for substitutes, because you have to have a classroom teacher available. And so that was what the purpose of that was. The plan is for that money to be allocated on a per pupil basis to those agencies that are participating, and put in the funds that are generally allocated to local school districts for substitute funds for substitutes. This law became effective several days ago, effective July 1, 2023. Obviously, we don't have the rules in place yet, and we can talk about the impact of that if you wish, but basically this law becomes effective, and this leave has to be provided to parents for births occurring on or after July 1, 2023. We did raise the question with the General Assembly through Jamie Falkenberry, our legislative liaison, about whether this also applied, this July 1, 2023, births after that date, to adoptive or foster care children, and the General Assembly meant for it to apply to only children born after July 1, 2023. So what you're going to see is some folks whose adoptions are finalized for a child who was born before July 1, this would not be applicable to them. We raised that issue, but that is the way the General Assembly indicated it wanted to leave it. As I said, there has been a technical corrections bill. It was pending when we wrote and submitted this PowerPoint. We have just found out this morning that these changes were made in this DHHS agency bill. They will include the following, and the rule we're going to talk about in a minute will include these changes when we bring it back to you in August. It makes it clear that the parental leave bill is extended to probationary and time-limited employees. You have you have employees who are not in a permanent full-time position, who may have a grant, may be working pursuant to a grant, or may be working pursuant to a contract of a certain length, and those people are also going to be entitled to this leave if they otherwise meet the criteria. It also allows the state Human Resources Commission to adopt rules as part of this, providing for leave following miscarriages or stillbirths. We will look and see what OSHR does with regard to that, but the state employee health commission will be looking at that, and we are required to adopt rules that are similar to that. They have already adopted and passed their rule, but it does not include these technical corrections, so they will be amending their bill, and we will be their proposed rule, and we will be amending our proposed rule. The proposed rule has to be a temporary rule. It cannot be an emergency rule. The Rules Review Commission has already indicated that, so we will need to go through the temporary rulemaking process with the rule that you hopefully will approve in August with the changes we're discussing. The bill did not appear to exempt charter schools. The charter school community raised that issue in the General Assembly and asked for a technical correction that would allow them to opt in to this benefit if they choose to do so. That will be an opt-in process, and we will need to set a date by which folks need to opt in for charter schools if they choose to opt in. If they do not opt in, then the bill provides that they would not get a share of the substitute money if they did not opt in to providing this benefit. Right now, they don't have to comply with the leave requirements in other areas, the charter schools, because they're exempted from those in the way the charter school statutes are written. So that's the law. What I'm going to do now is just talk about how the proposed rule differs from or adds to the law that we just went through. As I said, the State Personnel Commission has adopted a proposed temporary rule, which will be finalized probably in August or September. And we have to do something substantially similar. So we've tried to keep it as close to them as possible, but also compensating for the fact we have different situations, like we have a lot of 10 and 11-month employees who will not be continuously employed throughout this time, so we'll have to accommodate them. We anticipate that if this rule is adopted in August, at your August meeting, it'll take us probably till October or September to get a temporary rule in process. That does not mean the state law doesn't apply in the meantime. It means we don't have limiting rules in place or interpreting rules in place. So the proposed rules restate the law to some extent, but also add and clarify some things. First of all, they define an eligible employee, consistent with OSHR rules, as an eligible employee was one who's been employed to fill a permanent position. We talked about it did not include temporary or time-limited positions until the legislative changes that we just got to us this morning. Independent contractors still would not be covered. Those are people who actually work for someone else or work for themselves and are independent and not considered employees. In accordance with the statute, the proposed rules will include employees of all schools except the charter schools, which we just talked about because of the technical correction. They'll include employees of lab schools, regional schools, any other public schools. The rule also defines what it takes to become eligible for this benefit, and it, again, is consistent with the OSHR rule, will require employment for at least 12 months prior to receiving this benefit without a break in service and have been in pay status, and that's in the OSHR rule, for at least 1,040 hours, which is 6 months, which means you have to be receiving a paycheck. You can't just be an employee and then take unauthorized leave, for example, and become eligible. Again, this tracks the State Human Resources Commission rules. Break in service would not include time on workers' compensation leave, which is approved leave because of an injury on site, time on approved leave without pay, and again, sabbaticals and things like that would be approved leave without pay. Months of summer break for 10 or 11-month employees whose employment will continue for the following year. If their employment has been terminated, then that would not obviously be included. There will be also prorated leave on the next slide. for part-time employees based on the number of hours the employee works. So if you work a 20-hour week, for example, there will be prorated leave for that. The proposed rule also makes it clear that you get 100% of your pay during this time, but you don't get pay for overtime that you might normally have worked. So 100% of your regular straight time pay, but not overtime pay an employee might regularly work. Those might include people like bus drivers and teacher assistants work 2 jobs, split those hours, but goes over 40 regularly and they're paid overtime. They would not get that overtime pay. And another thing that in the proposed rule makes it clear is that paid parental leave cannot be deducted from an employee's sick, vacation leave, or other accrued leave, and it can run concurrent with leave to which but that it can run concurrent to leave which the employee might be entitled to under the Family Medical Leave Act. If you know that federal law, it requires that that employees be given the opportunity to take family and medical leave for up to 12 weeks during a year, but that's an unpaid leave provision, and it does say that you can, under state law, you can require that family medical leave 12-week entitlement does run concurrent with other kinds of leave at the state level. And so this comment would make it clear that this does not give an opportunity for 20 weeks of leave if you add it on top of the FMLA, but it's concurrent with the FMLA. The rule also requires or asks that the employee give notice in advance of the intent to take paid parental leave if possible. I mean, obviously in the case of a birth parent, there's some idea of when your child will be born or approximately when, and this will allow the employer to plan for that. But it's obviously not always possible. If it's an adoption that is by surprise, then obviously that won't be a requirement. The leave also, and the last slide says that the leave would be available only one time during the 12-month period for an individual employee. So if a foster parent takes on 2 or 3 foster kids in the same year, that does not entitle them to continually get paid leave for subsequent children that are being brought into the house during that year. And then finally, the law says that both parents must be allowed to take the leave at the same time if they work for the same employer. So that's added, that's part of the OSHR rules. That is a quick run through of what's in the rule and what's coming to you for action in August. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. This is a huge boon to employees, but it's also allowing, I mean, obviously there are state funds that will continue to be paid. We've had a lot of questions from the field, from attorneys. We've tried to answer those and incorporate their concerns or address their concerns as we look at the rules that we needed to adopt. And so there's still a lot of dialogue going back and forth. We do expect some comments over the next 30 days with regard to this proposed rule. And then we will also, once we get it proposed by you, we'll start the temporary rule process, and there will be a comment period after that as well. Any questions?
Thank you. Other questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Wendell.
Thank you, sir. Allison, this is my first time hearing of this. The LEAs have this info now concerning this parental leave? Have they been notified of it?
If they're following the statute, well, I presume the School Boards Association is keeping its membership up to some extent to the LEAs and the other groups, but we have not put this out yet publicly. We will send it out. I'm actually speaking to the North Carolina Council of School Attorneys group at the end of this month, so we will cover that as part of our presentation to them, what the law says, but the law is out there and has been out there since May. I'm not aware of what has been shared with the districts by their constituent organizations.
Well, this is just outstanding, and I just hope everyone knows of it. And you've answered number 10 answered all my questions. Indeed. Number 10. Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, let's go on then to Biz Op 6, which is a continuation of implementation of this through the state board policy. And I think we have Tom and or Ryan on this.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Dr. Tomlin.
So these are the updates to the benefits manual. So it's largely redundant to what you heard from Ms. Schaefer. I just wanted to go quickly over with the board members some of the existing benefits that are available to new parents, and then how the paid parental leave will interact with those existing benefits. So first is sick leave. Up to 30 days of earned sick leave may be used to care for a child placed with an employee for adoption or foster care, and it may be taken at any time within 12 months of placement. So in the policy manual, we're clarifying how sick leave can be used by a natural birth. And so for the birth of a child, there is a presumptive recuperation period of 30 days. Most medical professionals will sign out a new mother for 30 days for recuperation, and that's a standard practice, or it could be 45 days for a C-section delivery. We're just stipulating that we're allowing that immediately following the birth based on medical standard operating procedure. And so that would be available to the birthing parent immediately following birth. Next slide. The Family Medical Leave Act, of course, giving birth or acquiring a child is a FMLA qualifying event. So this allows up to 12 weeks of unpaid job protected leave during the qualifying event. The employee may use accrued annual leave or personal leave during this time to remain in payroll status. Sick leave may be used if indicated by a medical professional. So FMLA doesn't always qualify you to use sick leave, but in the case where the doctor prescribes leave, then they could use it during the FMLA period. Parents who are employed by the same employer are limited to a total of 12 weeks of FMLA. And then finally, there is a provision in an existing provision for unpaid parental leave. So state employees of school systems have the ability to take up to 1 calendar year from the date of birth for adoption, for birth, adoption, or foster placement. They may use annual leave or sick leave if ordered by a medical professional to maintain their payroll status during that time. Parents who are both employed are limited to a combined total of 12 months. So that parental leave has always been on the books and is up to 1 calendar year. This provision provides paid parental leave that doesn't draw down off the employee's accrued leave. Next slide, please. So I will not go over these definitions because I think Ms. Schaefer did a wonderful job of explaining who qualifies for this and what the terms mean. So we'll go on to the next slide. And the eligibility, this is also fairly redundant. This says that that this is not eligible. It is only permanent employees, and temporary and time limited are not included. We will update that based on the provisions or the rules developed by OSHR and the pending technical corrections. But under this, we do want to recognize that each PSU is a separate employer for meeting the 12-month employment requirement. So this is going to be really important messaging for the field, that transferring from LEA to LEA would reset your 12-month employment requirement, and you would not be eligible until you had been employed by that particular LEA for 12 months. In the benefits manual, we list the documentation that school districts can ask for to verify the eligibility for the paid parental leave. And this comports with the OSHR guidelines. Leave is limited to 12 months following the qualifying event. Multiple births or multiple placements do not increase the total amount of leave. So whether you had twins or triplets, you would still get 8 weeks for the birthing parent or 4 weeks for the non-birthing parent, regardless of the number of children that were introduced in that 12-month period. Unused paid parental leave is forfeit 12 months from the date of the qualifying event. It doesn't accrue, it doesn't carry over, and it cannot be used for voluntary shared leave. Parental paid leave shall not be counted against or deducted from the employee's leave balances. Employees shall not be paid out for this leave upon separation from the employer. So if a person decided to separate in the middle of their 8 weeks, the LEA would not have to pay out that leave to the employee. And then paid parental leave may not be donated to another employee. Leave usage. A PSU shall not deny, delay, or require intermittent use, and that should say use, not us, of paid parental leave to eligible employees except by mutual agreement of the PSU and the employee. If delayed, the PSU must provide paid parental leave as soon as practical. If parental leave is used intermittently, the use must be agreeable to both the PSU and the eligible employee. If the leave is used continuously, though, the LEA cannot deny the birthing parent the leave. And some other considerations here. The paid parental leave is in addition to all other parental benefits offered by the state. So those three that I addressed before we got to the paid parental leave, an employee could use any of them in any order he or she chooses, provided the employee meets the criteria for using that leave at that time. So in other words, you could take the 30 sick days immediately following birth and then leverage your paid parental leave or whatever configuration may work for the employee as long as they qualify. Employees may take paid parental leave is afforded to eligible employees for a child born on or after July 1st, 2023, regardless of the date of adoption or legal placement. So the birth of the child triggers the leave, not the placement. And so this is going to be really important to communicate to the field and will inevitably cause some angst among some of our employees. If they adopt the child on August 1st, but the child was born in June, they would not be eligible for this leave. To kind of preemptively address Mr. Hall's question earlier, on Monday, July 10th, we have our regularly scheduled statewide HR directors webinar, where we will cover what we know at this point about this policy and where we are in this and provide as much guidance as we can to all the state's HR directors so they're aware of this provision. And I am happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions or comments?
Yes, sir. This is Kimberly Jones. I had a quick question. I was listening to the definitions of parent and birth parent. Would this cover surrogacy?
It would cover surrogacy in the sense of a legal placement. That's a great question. We'll have to take up with legal and with OSHR. Would the receiving the surrogate parents,
yes,
one of them be designated as the birthing parent? And my sense would be no. They would be a non-birthing parent and only eligible for 4 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
This is Allison Schaefer, if I may. There are a lot of unanswered questions that have been posed to us like that already, and we're still working through those, and we will continue to do that as we get them, and we're going to have to deal with them one by one, but we're not, what we have before you now doesn't cover every possible scenario.
All right. For board members, you can see this is obviously something that late breaking includes technical changes that have been going on within the past few days. And a lot of work's been done on coming up with both the proposed rules and the policy, both at the department and other places. So we're appreciative of the work that's going into this, and we'll have a chance to see some further development in that at our meeting before we vote on this. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, not hearing any. We have executed contracts report, planned contracts report. I have not heard any questions on those or on the monthly budget report, but I'll wait for a moment to see if anyone has any questions on any of those items. All right, having waited a moment, not hearing any, I think that concludes our report. Chair Davis, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, and that concludes our committee discussions for today. We'll now vote on any item requiring action from your committee work. A discussion and report was provided on each item, including respective consent items. And as a reminder, these consent items are primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion the prior month, and we've certainly seen them for at least a week. I do want to note for the record that Mr. Keenan has recused himself from BizOp 3. It's Mr. Keenan from BizOp 3. At this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from the consent action or action on first reading agendas to vote separately. Hearing none, I ask for a motion to approve the following. The May 31st and June 1st, 2023 meeting minutes, SLA 1 through 7, EICS 1 through 3 and 7, HRS 1, ES&P 1 through 4, BizOp 1 through 4, and the limited license and initial professional license request presented to us in closed session. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Oxendine. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Kamnitz. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Petrie Martin, will you capture the vote?
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Yes. Mrs. Camden. Yes. Yes. Mr. Keenan. Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Rogers.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Blackburn.
Yes.
Dr. Ford. Treasurer Caldwell. Lieutenant Governor Robinson. Vice Chair.
Yes. Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. This concludes our agenda for the day. I want to thank our staff at DPI, fellow board members, advisors, and all those who contributed to this meeting. And I want to wish all of our educators, students, families, and partners across the state a safe and restful summer. This time I ask for a motion to adjourn.
I like the motion.
Motion by Dr. Tipton Rogers. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Blackburn. Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Yes. Mrs. Camden. Mr. Keenan. Mr. Hall. Dr. Tipton Rogers. Yes. Dr. Tipton Rogers.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Blackburn.
Yes.
Dr. Ford. Treasurer Caldwell. Lieutenant Governor Robinson.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. We are adjourned. Have Have a good summer.